All right, so it's Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, and it's been 18 days. 18 days since the US and Israel kicked off what they told us would be a really quick, decisive campaign against Iran. Well, today that promise is just in pieces. What was supposed to be a short operation has completely spiraled out of control into this multi-front crisis that is, and this is not an exaggeration, shaking the entire globe. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this happened. We'll use the latest intel and reporting to really understand the anatomy of what's looking like a massive strategic failure. So get this, just 2 days ago, a leaked intelligence report dropped an absolute bombshell. Forget winning, forget even making progress. The phrase they're using to describe the Western alliance right now, strategic paralysis. I mean, let that sink in for a second. That is a stunning admission of failure. It basically suggests that the entire reason for this war has completely fallen apart in what, just over 2 weeks? And that really brings us to the core question, right? How on earth did an operation that was planned to be quick and clean become this strategic nightmare so fast? That's what we're here to unpack. Okay, so this chart right here really just lays it out plain and simple. Look at the difference between what was promised and where we are now. Back on March 1st, the White House was projecting a 4-week war. Tops. We're now on day 18, and nobody has any idea when this will end. This is the massive miscalculation at the very heart of this crisis. So the big question is, how did they get it so wrong? Well, let's start with the military picture. You see, this isn't your classic war with big, decisive battles. Nope. This is a war of attrition. And it turns out Iran is using some pretty clever asymmetric tactics to basically bankrupt a superpower. To really get what Iran is doing, you have to understand this one key concept, the interceptor sink. Now think of it like this. It's like you're trying to stop a massive flood, but all you have are expensive champagne bottles to throw at it. It's kind of crazy, right? Iran is just overwhelming America's incredibly expensive, multi-million-dollar defense systems with swarms of cheap drones and missiles. So yeah, the US might be winning every individual engagement, but they're absolutely losing the economic war. And this number shows you the brutal math behind that interceptor sink strategy. For every one cheap Iranian drone or missile, it's taking, on average, 11 advanced US interceptors to shoot it down. 11 to 1. You don't have to be an economist to know that's a completely unsustainable exchange rate. And what does that 11 to 1 ratio translate to in dollars? Well, a staggering $66 million for each of those takedowns. Now, imagine that happening a few dozen times every single night. At that point, you're not just fighting a war, you are hemorrhaging cash. This is financial warfare, just cleverly disguised as a missile exchange. And look, the costs go way beyond just money. As you can see here, Iran is systematically taking apart the US and Israel's ability to even see what's coming, let alone react. We're talking critical refueling tankers, super advanced early warning radars, even a key signals intelligence hub in Israel. Their missile stocks for things like Patriot and THAAD systems, reportedly running critically low. They are effectively blinding their enemy, one crucial asset at a time. Okay, so the crisis on the battlefield is now bleeding over and turning into a full-blown global economic crisis. And it's all because Iran has weaponized the Strait of Hormuz, the world's oil lifeline. But this isn't just a simple blockade. Oh no, this is much more sophisticated. It's a calculated act of economic warfare. And this right here, this explains Iran's economic masterstroke. For decades, the entire global system has run on the petrodollar. It's been the bedrock of American power. But now, Iran has created what's being called a yuan filter. They're basically saying, sure, oil can pass through the strait, but only if it's paid for in Chinese currency. This is a direct, frontal assault on the US financial system. So how are they pulling this off? Well, it's basically a 3-step playbook. First, you blockade the strait. Cause total chaos. Second, you create an exception, offering safe passage, but only to a select few. And third, the masterstroke. You force the switch. You mandate that anyone who wants that safe passage has to bypass the US dollar. It is an incredibly calculated move to just rewrite the rules of the global economy on their terms. And the shock waves are already hitting us, all of us. Oil prices, they're surging, heading toward $150 a barrel. But the real threat here might actually be food. As you can see, this blockade has cut off over 1/3 of the world's supply of urea. That's a key ingredient in fertilizer. And this is happening right at the start of planting season. We're not just talking about a recession anymore. We could be looking at the very real possibility of a global famine. So you've got a military crisis and an economic crisis. Well, now they're feeding a diplomatic one. Washington, which for so long has been the undisputed leader of the free world, is finding itself more and more isolated. I mean, just look at this timeline. It really charts the White House's rapid descent from confidence to, well, panic. It starts on March 1st with Trump boasting about a quick victory. Then, by the 14th, he's publicly begging allies to send warships. Just 2 days later, he gets publicly rejected. And then yesterday, reports surface that a huge diplomatic trip to China has been suddenly canceled. This is an administration in freefall. And this quote right here, it perfectly sums up the mood in Europe. The thinking is basically, hey, you guys started this war, you didn't even bother to consult us, and now you want us to come and clean up your mess? I mean, you can see why they're not exactly jumping to help. Allies feel betrayed, and they feel like they're being asked to pay the price for a decision they had no part in. And we're not talking about small countries here. Look at this list. Germany, Italy, Spain, Australia. These are key NATO allies, a major partner in the Pacific. They have all publicly said no to the president's call for help. I mean, that is a stunning public vote of no confidence in American leadership. So what happens when your allies abandon you and your military is being bled dry? Well, reports are now saying the White House is turning to its #1 geopolitical rival for help. In what is just an absolutely stunning turn of events, Washington is apparently begging Beijing to help solve a crisis that is, ironically, making China stronger every single day. So what's the big takeaway from all this? What does it all mean? You know, we might be watching more than just a military screw-up here. We could be witnessing the end of the American era in the Middle East and the really messy, violent birth of an entirely new world order. This table really just lays it all out. It's a dramatic reversal of fortunes. The US and Israel went from unchallenged dominance to being logistically exhausted and diplomatically isolated. Iran, once contained by sanctions, is now asserting control. And who's sitting pretty? China and Russia, who were perfectly positioned to step in as the new power brokers in the whole region. And this final quote, I think, just says it all. The rules-based order, that system that has basically governed the world since World War II, it's not just cracking anymore, it's collapsing. And that collapse might be, as the report says, terminal. Which leaves us with this final massive question. With the old order completely broken, who's going to write the new rules? The answer to that question is going to define the rest of our century. And you know what? That answer is being written right now, today, in the deserts of the Middle East and in the halls of power in Beijing.
Right now, the United States military is spending roughly $66 million to shoot down what is essentially a piece of fiberglass powered by a modified lawnmower engine.
Yeah, it's a completely inverted cost-exchange ratio.
I mean, we are looking at a tactical environment where a single really slow-moving drone that costs, maybe a few $1,000 to make is pulling a volley of up to 11 high-tier interceptors just to guarantee a kill.
Right, which is just financially and logistically unsustainable.
Exactly. And, well, welcome to today's deep dive. We're exactly 18 days into Operation Roaring Lion. That's the massive U.S. and Israeli military campaign against Iran. Today is Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, and the mathematics of modern warfare have officially broken down.
They really have. When a military superpower is forced to expend its most, exquisite, sophisticated air defense assets to counter these low-tech swarms, the whole paradigm of conventional dominance just collapses. We are witnessing the bankruptcy of a defense doctrine that's guided Western military procurement for, the last 40 years?
Yeah, at least 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission today is to cut through the extreme fog of war. We've been looking at fresh intelligence reports, military updates, and geopolitical analysis from just the last 48 hours.
And the picture it paints is, it's an epic failure of strategy. The overwhelming technological superiority of the U.S. and Israel is actively being turned against them.
Which is why we need to unpack this for you, the listener. Because this isn't just a distant conflict. This is a crisis that is fundamentally rewiring the global economy right now. It's threatening your daily cost of living, your grocery bills, gas prices, and basically reshaping the entire world order you grew up in.
Absolutely. The cascading effects are moving so much faster than the markets can even price them in. I mean, a drone strike on a radar installation on a Sunday literally translates into spiked grocery and gas prices across Europe and North America by Wednesday.
Right. But before we get into all that, I need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener. The sources we are analyzing today contain highly polarized, heavily politically charged content. We're talking extreme viewpoints from both left-wing and right-wing perspectives.
Very extreme.
Yeah. So we will impartially report on this content to convey the ideas in the source material, but we absolutely do not endorse or take sides on any of the viewpoints, ideologies, or claims presented. We are just here to analyze the data.
Exactly. We're just looking at the mechanics of what's happening.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how we got to this precipice, we really have to look at the opening move of this war, which was predicated on a massive miscalculation of Iran's resilience.
Right, the decapitation strike.
Yeah. On March 1st, the U.S. and Israel executed this massive strike aimed at fracturing the Iranian state. And tactically, it worked. They killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
They did. And the operating theory in Washington and Tel Aviv was that the Iranian regime was this fragile, unpopular autocracy that would just shatter if you removed the keystone.
Which, makes sense if you look at their models.
Right. The intelligence apparatus relied heavily on this psychological model. They looked at the internal protests Iran has faced, the economic dissatisfaction, the younger generation feeling alienated. So the assumption was that a sudden kinetic shock at the very top would catalyze a collapse.
Like instant civil war, basically.
Exactly. They expected factional infighting within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the regular military splintering, and just a generalized collapse of state control.
Which would let Western forces dictate a new security architecture. But that is not what happened.
Not at all. Institutions, especially theocratic ones, have a survival instinct.
Yeah, instead of a power vacuum, the Iranian state apparatus consolidated incredibly fast. The Assembly of Experts in the IRGC just closed ranks right behind Mojtaba Khamenei.
And the new supreme leader didn't panic. He didn't offer concessions. He immediately broadcast a directive shifting the whole nation to a war footing. He specifically vowed a long war of systemic, asymmetric attrition.
Right. They completely refused the invitation to fight a conventional force-on-force war.
Because they'd lose. They know they can't compete with fifth-generation stealth fighters or carrier strike groups. So they pivoted to area denial. And the centerpiece of that is what the theater assessments are calling the interceptor sink.
Okay, let's break down this interceptor sink because this brings us back to that $66 million statistic. The U.S. and Israel rely on these layered air defense networks, Patriot PAC-3 batteries, Katyani systems, Iron Dome, David's Sling.
Incredible engineering marvels.
Unbelievable technology.
Yeah.
But they were designed to hit high-speed, predictable threats, right? Like ballistic missiles.
Yeah, the physics and the economics are tailored to a very specific threat profile. A PAC-3 interceptor is designed to hit a bullet with a bullet in the upper atmosphere. It's packed with advanced sensors and maneuvering thrusters.
And it costs millions.
Millions. But when Iran launches a wave of these cheap, propeller-driven loitering munitions, they fly low. They use terrain masking. They have a tiny radar cross-section.
So they basically look like birds to the radar.
Right, or ground clutter, until they are right on top of the target. And when the radar finally resolves the threat, the defense system has seconds to react.
Wow.
And because the drones are flying so low and slow, they fall outside the optimal engagement envelope of the big interceptors. Plus, the defense networks run on algorithms designed to guarantee a kill. So if the system sees a swarm and calculates a high risk of penetration, it automatically allocates multiple interceptors to a single target.
To make sure it doesn't get through.
Exactly. Hence the 11 interceptors for one drone.
And the U.S. commanders can't just ignore them, right? Because even a cheap drone with a 40-pound warhead can blow up a multi-million-dollar jet on the tarmac.
Right, or wipe out a command center. They are forced to engage, and they're trapped because the industrial base cannot save them here. The U.S. only makes a finite number of these interceptors a year. They take years to build.
Because of the rare earth minerals and microchips?
Yeah, highly skilled labor, complex supply chains. Meanwhile, Iran is stamping out thousands of these drones in rudimentary factories with commercial off-the-shelf parts. So the U.S. and allied stockpiles are facing total logistical bankruptcy. They are literally running out of ammo for their shields.
And as the shields are running out, the eyes of the network are being blinded. I mean, the reports highlight the destruction of key radar installations, the early warning radar in Qatar, the one in Bahrain, both completely destroyed by Iranian precision strikes.
And those aren't just local tactical radars. Those are massive phased array systems that give the whole theater deep look, situational awareness.
Once those go offline.
The entire command and control architecture degrades. The Aegis destroyers and the Patriot batteries lose their integrated picture. They have to rely on their own local radars, which severely limits their reaction time.
And this breakdown is leading directly to a massive force protection crisis on the ground. Like the official Pentagon figures say 13 U.S. service members have been killed in action. But the intelligence analysts looking at the raw theater data are saying that is a massive undercount. And it points to a huge vulnerability that planners just missed.
Right, the dispersal problem. Because the main bases in the Gulf didn't have enough deep, hardened bunkers for everyone during a sustained bombardment. They had to disperse the troops.
Which makes sense normally. You spread out so one strike doesn't take everyone out.
Exactly. Dispersal is standard doctrine. But in the Gulf, they didn't have hardened secondary facilities, so they moved troops into civilian infrastructure, soft targets.
Like luxury hotels in the UAE and Bahrain.
Yeah, high-end hotels, apartment complexes. The logic was that hiding among the civilian population would create a human shield effect. They assumed Iran wouldn't risk the diplomatic fallout of hitting a luxury hotel in Dubai.
But that assumption was totally wrong.
Fatal, really. Iranian signals intelligence, which is heavily augmented by Russian satellite data and cyber espionage, just mapped the dispersal patterns. They tracked cell phone metadata, logistical movements, the sudden spike in encrypted comms coming from these hotels.
Wow, so they just targeted the hotels.
Yes, with precise drone strikes. And the casualties happening in these civilian environments are highly classified, they're hard to extract, which is why there's this massive discrepancy in the death toll.
Man. And it's not just on the ground. The vulnerability is hitting the air operations, too. We saw the loss of the U.S. Air Force KC-135 refueling plane over western Iraq. All 6 crew members dead.
Which fundamentally alters the geometry of the air war.
Right, because carrier-based fighters like the Super Hornet only have a combat radius of about 500 nautical miles. If the carrier's in the Arabian Sea, those jets can't reach deep inside Iran, fight, and come back without mid-air refueling.
The tankers are the logistical bridges of the sky. By targeting those refueling tracks, either shooting at them or forcing them out of the airspace, Iran puts the U.S. air wing on a very short leash.
The jets are basically useless if they don't have the gas to get to the fight.
Exactly, and the airspace itself is just saturated. It's creating this unmanageable, chaotic environment. You've got hundreds of inbound drones, outbound interceptors, heavy electronic warfare jamming, civilian planes trying to route around it.
The fog of war is literal.
It really is, which is how you get that tragic friendly fire incident. Kuwaiti air defense accidentally shot down 3 U.S. F-15s.
Jeez, 3 of them.
Yeah. In a jammed, high-stress environment, the identification friend or foe systems can fail. An operator staring at a cluttered radar screen has split seconds to decide if a track is a cruise missile or an allied jet. Fratricide just becomes a statistical reality.
And this chaos isn't staying in the Persian Gulf. The naval theater is expanding in a really unprecedented way. The sources detail the sinking of an Iranian frigate, the Iris Dine. But this didn't happen in the Strait of Hormuz.
No, it was deep in the Indian Ocean.
Right off the coast of Sri Lanka. A U.S. Navy submarine torpedoed it. Between 84 and 184 Iranian sailors died. Sri Lanka actually had to scramble jets and do search and rescue in their own economic zone.
Which signals a massive shift. The U.S. knows it can't safely operate surface ships inside the constrained missile-heavy waters of the Gulf, so they're using subs to hunt Iranian ships globally.
But that means the conflict zones are metastasizing.
Exactly. The sea lanes of the Indian Ocean, which are vital for Asian energy imports, are now active combat zones.
Let's pivot to Israel for a second, because the concept of safe airspace is totally gone there too. Iran's retaliation strikes, which they're calling Epic Fury, have achieved sustained penetration of the Iron Dome.
Something decades of rocket fire from Gaza or Lebanon rarely managed.
Right. Central Israel, Tel Aviv taking direct hits. But the mechanics are slightly different than the drone swarms in the Gulf, right?
Yeah, Iran is heavily using ballistic missiles with cluster munition payloads against Israel. So instead of one massive warhead, the missile opens up in the upper atmosphere and drops hundreds of smaller submunitions.
It's like a shotgun blast.
Exactly. The Iron Dome radar suddenly goes from tracking one trajectory to tracking hundreds simultaneously. It just overwhelms the processing power and physically outnumbers the interceptor tubes on the ground.
And the psychological impact is profound. I mean, there's raw footage of a strike penetrating the defenses around Jerusalem and hitting the Knesset building directly.
The symbol of state sovereignty.
Yeah. You literally see members of parliament panicking, diving into bunkers while the building shakes.
When the core of a nation's government has to operate from subterranean bunkers while the Capitol burns, it shatters the social contract. The state's primary function is security. When that evaporates so visibly, domestic politics become highly unstable.
Which brings us to this really bizarre detail in the reports. It feels like a glitch in the matrix. Amidst all this bunker-level chaos, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is essentially vanished from the public eye. He's reportedly missed critical security briefings. And his office released these proof-of-life videos over the last few days to quell rumors of his death. But independent analysts and open-source intelligence guys immediately tore them apart.
Because they're deep fakes.
AI-generated deepfakes.
Yeah, digital forensics overwhelmingly point to synthetic media. Generating a video of a world leader is easy now, but doing a flawless one under extreme time pressure is still hard.
And the errors were glaring once you knew what to look for. In one video of him giving an address, frame-by-frame analysis showed the AI hallucinated his hand. He had 6 fingers.
Wow.
And in another one, he's supposed to be relaxed in a secure location, drinking a cappuccino. Analysts pointed out that the microbubbles in the foam didn't move at all. It was just a 2D texture mapped onto a 3D object. And there's a distinct digital blur right at the exact millisecond he supposedly swallows the coffee.
That is, I mean, the implications of that are terrifying. If the continuity of government in a nuclear-armed state is so compromised that they're using AI to project an illusion of command, who is actually in charge?
Exactly. Who is authorizing the strikes? Who controls the nukes?
The intelligence communities in Washington and Europe must be in absolute overdrive trying to figure out who they are even dealing with in Tel Aviv.
Okay, so the military situation looks bleak. It's like a heavyweight boxer throwing million-dollar knockout punches at a swarm of bees. Eventually, the boxer just collapses from exhaustion. But let me push back a bit. The U.S. is deploying B-1 and B-52 bombers to Europe. They're sending 5,000 Marines. Isn't overwhelming force eventually going to crack the Iranian defenses?
Brute force can destroy infrastructure, sure, but it cannot secure logistics, and modern warfare is entirely about logistics.
Right.
To sustain a bombing campaign, those B-52s need immense amounts of jet fuel, spare parts, secure air bases. The 5,000 Marines need a massive naval armada to transport them, and an unbroken supply chain of food and ammo once they land.
And they don't have that.
The problem isn't a lack of firepower. It's the inability to project it, because their supply lines have to pass through an area they no longer control.
Because they can't secure the airspace, so they can't secure the seas.
Exactly. And this transitions us from a purely tactical military failure into arguably the most terrifying aspect of this whole crisis. The military stalemate is just the mechanism enabling the weaponization of global trade.
Right, the economic chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. It is actively dismantling the foundational architecture of the global economy. For half a century, the absolute bedrock of American financial hegemony has been the petrodollar system.
So oil priced in dollars.
Right. Since the 1970s, global oil transactions had to be priced and settled in U.S. dollars. This created an artificial, universal demand for dollars, which let the U.S. run massive deficits, control international banking through SWIFT, and export its inflation.
If you wanted energy, you had to buy dollars first. That's why U.S. sanctions are so deadly.
Precisely. But Iran hasn't just mined the Strait of Hormuz to shut off the 20% of global oil that flows through it.
Because a total blockade would make everyone mad, right? China, India.
Exactly. It will unite the world against them. Instead, they're implementing what analysts call the yuan filter.
Oh, yuan filter.
It is asymmetric economic genius. The IRGC Navy is selectively targeting Western-aligned shipping, but offering guaranteed safe passage to vessels that comply with one specific mandate.
Paying in Chinese currency.
Yes. The cargo must be cleared and paid for using the Chinese renminbi, or yuan. They are physically enforcing the de-dollarization of the energy market at gunpoint.
And the reports detail a specific incident proving this is already happening. The Karachi.
Right, a massive oil tanker bound for Pakistan.
It was idling outside the strait, basically held hostage by the threat of Iranian missiles. And it only got clearance to pass after the Pakistani government negotiated a currency swap. They promised to pay Abu Dhabi for the oil, using Chinese yuan, through CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system.
Entirely bypassing the US dollar and SWIFT.
Completely bypassing it.
And by letting the Karachi through, Iran proved to the developing world that energy security is still available. You just have to abandon the American financial system.
It's a binary choice. Suffer economic collapse or transition to the Chinese architecture.
And the immediate shockwaves are tearing through Western markets. In 18 days, Brent crude surged past $114 a barrel. Analysts are projecting it could hit $150 or even $200 as the dollar loses its monopoly.
And we're seeing it at the pump. Gas prices in the West jumped 25% to 30% in just 2 weeks.
Because the elasticity of demand for oil is so low, people still have to commute, trucks still have to deliver food. When the baseline cost of moving physical goods jumps 30% in a fortnight, it triggers a recursive inflationary loop across everything.
But there's a really grim paradox here, because while the average citizen is absorbing this shock, major Western oil corporations are posting record windfall profits.
Over $26 billion in just the first few weeks.
It's insane. They're selling their pre-conflict inventory at the new, massive, panic-driven prices. It's a huge wealth transfer from the middle class to the energy sector, driven entirely by geopolitical fear.
But as bad as the energy crisis is, it's manageable in the short term with reserves and rationing. The real existential threat is the secondary effect.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The energy shock is metastasizing into an agricultural shock. And this changes the conflict from a severe recession into a generational catastrophe. The analysts are calling it the urea factor.
Yes, the urea factor.
So to understand this, you have to look at how we feed 8 billion people. Modern agriculture relies entirely on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, specifically urea.
Right. The carrying capacity of the Earth relies on the Haber-Bosch process,
Which takes atmospheric nitrogen and binds it with hydrogen to make ammonia and then urea. But it requires immense heat and pressure.
And almost all of that energy and the hydrogen itself comes from natural gas.
And the Persian Gulf isn't just oil. It's the beating heart of global natural gas and petrochemicals.
Exactly. And the reports confirm the conflict has severed supply lines so badly that 35% of the global supply of urea is currently missing from the market.
Over a third of the foundational ingredient for global food production just vanished.
And the timing is apocalyptic. It's mid-March. The 2026 planting season in the Northern Hemisphere is beginning right now.
The American Midwest, Canada, Europe, Russia.
The soil has to be prepped now. If farmers can't get urea because the supply chains are frozen or the price spiked 400%, they either plant without it or they plant fewer acres.
And biology doesn't care about politics. Without nitrogen, the yields will plummet. We are locking in a catastrophic harvest failure for the fall of 2026.
Corn, wheat, soy. And because livestock relies on those grains, the meat and dairy industries will collapse right after.
The fuse is lit right now in the spring and the bomb goes off in the fall.
And it's already visible in developing nations with thinner margins. Look at India. South Asia relies heavily on Gulf energy.
The details from India are just visceral. Because of the immediate spike in natural gas prices, traditional crematoriums are literally running out of fuel. They can't source the gas to burn the dead.
Wow.
And restaurants across major Indian cities have just stopped deep frying food. The energy to keep large vats of oil boiling is just too expensive.
It's a fundamental alteration of daily life and culture because of a distant naval blockade.
Which brings up the collateral damage happening in the Gulf itself. The war is moving past just military targets. The U.S. strikes on Karg Island, for example.
Right, the main terminal for Iran's crude exports. Tactically, hitting it makes sense to deprive them economically.
But the collateral damage was massive. The bombardment destroyed an ancient Christian monastery and a complex of UNESCO-listed catacombs that were over 1,800 years old.
Which is a disaster for global public opinion. The U.S. frames its interventions as defending Western civilizational values. Vaporizing ancient Christian history to hit a pipeline is a massive propaganda victory for adversaries.
It paints the U.S. as a reckless hegemon. And Iran is retaliating ruthlessly against Gulf infrastructure, specifically targeting water.
Yeah, the Achilles heel of desert civilizations. Desalination plants.
Right. They hit a critical facility on Qeshm Island, and they're threatening the massive complexes on the coast of the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Cities like Dubai and Riyadh only exist because of reverse osmosis desalination powered by cheap energy. If a drone swarm knocks out the power grid for those plants, a city of millions runs out of drinkable water in days.
It's a Damoclean sword hanging over the Gulf monarchies, keeping them from fully aligning with the U.S., and the targeting extends to digital infrastructure too. Dubai International Airport keeps facing prolonged closures from drone swarms. The Burj Al Arab was damaged. But perhaps most critically, Iranian drones struck Amazon Web Services data centers in the UAE.
That is a massive escalation.
Right.
By targeting AWS, Iran is saying they view the cloud infrastructure hosting Western corporate data as a legitimate military target. The chokehold isn't just physical cargo anymore, it's the digital flow of capital and logistics.
So if I'm sitting at home in Europe or the US listening to this, how long until this yuan filter and fertilizer shortage directly impacts my ability to feed my family?
Months. Not years, months. The geopolitical realignment happening right now is a direct result of that exact panic.
Which brings us to President Trump's diplomatic isolation. He's built his foreign policy on demanding Europe rely less on the U.S. and pay more. But now he's caught in a profound role reversal. He's actually begging those same allies for a maritime bailout.
Because the Pentagon realized the U.S. Navy simply doesn't have the ships to simultaneously hunt submarines, provide missile defense for Israel, and run convoys through a mined, drone-saturated Strait of Hormuz.
So Trump formally requested NATO allies deploy frigates to the Gulf to escort commercial ships.
Trying to recreate the convoys from the 1980s?
But America's geopolitical capital is bankrupt. The response from Europe and the Pacific was a categorical refusal. Germany, Italy, Spain, Australia all publicly declined.
And the language was openly hostile.
Yeah. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius just flatly said, "It's not our war, we didn't start it." And Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez heavily criticized the U.S. for starting a unilateral war without consulting allies and then demanding their blood and treasure to clean up the mess.
It's the de facto collapse of NATO as an instrument for global force projection. European militaries are depleted from supplying Ukraine, their economies are struggling, and they just lack the political will to sacrifice their remaining warships for a policy they disagree with.
So, rejected by NATO, the Trump administration executed a pivot so desperate it borders on the surreal. The president reached out to America's primary strategic rival, China.
Right.
He made a direct plea for Beijing to intervene, asking them to use their economic leverage over Iran to force open the strait and stop the attacks.
Which is an admission of defeat. Asking your chief global competitor to save you from a crisis of your own making.
And Beijing's response was just calculated humiliation. Chinese state media mocked the U.S. Navy. And that highly anticipated late March summit between Trump and Xi Jinping in Beijing. The Chinese Foreign Ministry just abruptly canceled it, or delayed it indefinitely.
Because she has zero incentive to help. The current paradigm benefits China immensely. Thanks to the yuan filter, Chinese oil tankers are sailing through the strait completely unbothered because they're paying in renminbi.
So China secures cheap energy, internationalizes its currency, and watches the U.S. military bleed its interceptor stockpiles dry in an unwinnable war.
Exactly. And they're using this window to cement a massive partnership with Iran and Russia, creating an autarky immune to Western blockades.
And the cost of this Middle East entanglement is being paid by U.S. allies in the Pacific. To build up forces to even threaten an invasion of Kharg Island, the U.S. is pulling THAAD batteries, Patriot systems, and 5,000 Marines out of forward-deployed bases in Japan and South Korea.
The American security umbrella over East Asia is being folded up and shipped to the Middle East. The deterrence keeping peace in Taiwan and Korea is degrading visibly, and the PLA knows it.
The intelligence reports flag a massive mobilization in the East China Sea. China has deployed thousands of maritime militia vessels, essentially fishing boats, controlled by the military in tight geometric formations.
Textbook gray zone warfare. They're physically asserting control over the sea lanes around Taiwan and the Senkaku Islands, demonstrating to Taipei and Tokyo that the U.S. can't respond to a Pacific crisis anymore.
So what does this all mean? We always hear the buzzword multipolar world, but is this the exact moment the post-WWII American-led order actually breaks?
I think so. The American-led order was built on the U.S. Navy guaranteeing freedom of navigation, underwritten by the U.S. dollar. Both pillars are collapsing in real time. This isn't a peaceful diplomatic transition, it's a violent unwinding.
And what makes this unwinding so uniquely dangerous is that the geopolitical fracturing is perfectly mirrored by a massive fracture within Western societies themselves. We're looking at an unprecedented domestic information war.
The domestic front isn't even debating policy anymore. They are debating the fundamental nature of reality.
Right. And I have to remind a listener again, we are strictly impartial here. We do not endorse these views, but we must report them to show how the domestic narrative is breaking apart. There was this highly viral, explosive interview 48 hours ago between a prominent U.S. influencer and a mainstream British broadcaster.
And it perfectly encapsulates the polarization.
It was a collision of entirely separate universes. The influencer argued that the U.S. political establishment is hopelessly compromised by foreign lobbying,
Right.
specifically pro-Israel PACs. He framed the war not as national security, but as a mercenary action.
But then it escalated into maximalist conspiracy theory.
Absolutely. He blamed foreign intelligence for historical false flags like JFK assassination and the Jeffrey Epstein blackmail ring. He aggressively minimized the October 7th atrocities, suggested casualty numbers were fake, and even cited religious texts alleging a theology of supremacy driving state policy.
And the British broadcaster pushed back fiercely.
Fiercely. He cited the UN reports confirming severe sexual violence during October 7th. He repeatedly labeled the influencer an anti-Semite, comparing his rhetoric to literal 1930s Nazi propaganda.
The interview dissolved into accusations of profound moral corruption. But the real significance is that millions of people watched that same video, and both sides walked away convinced they completely dismantled the other.
There's no shared baseline of facts anymore. One side sees a civilizational defense against terrorism, the other sees a hijacked government.
And when a society loses a shared reality, it loses the capacity to sustain a coherent foreign policy. You can't mobilize a country for an economically devastating war if half the public thinks it's a fraudulent conspiracy.
Meanwhile, leadership in Washington seems totally distracted. While the Middle East burns, Trump recently mused in an interview about the logistics of taking Cuba.
The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The U.S. can't secure the Persian Gulf, but the executive branch is contemplating regime change 90 miles from Florida as a nostalgic distraction.
And some officials are eschewing geopolitical analysis entirely. They're framing the Iran war in literal Armageddon terms, eschatological terms.
Which is the most dangerous variable. If decision makers view this as a prophesied final battle between good and evil, the concept of a diplomatic off-ramp vanishes. You cannot negotiate a ceasefire during Armageddon.
It's like sitting in a movie theater, where the screen is split down the middle. One side is a high-stakes war movie playing at max volume. The other is a paranoid conspiracy thriller. The audience is brawling over, which is real. The projectionist is preaching end-times theology, and the theater is quietly catching fire.
That is an incredibly apt analogy for the West right now.
So how does this end? Based on the last 18 days, what are the most likely scenarios for the coming weeks? Is there a diplomatic off-ramp?
There is, but the price tag is astronomical. Iran's demand is consistent. They will reopen the strait if the U.S. completely withdraws all military forces from the Persian Gulf.
Which would stop the economic bleeding,
But it's a catastrophic strategic defeat. It permanently cedes regional hegemony to an Iran-Russia-China axis.
And if the U.S. refuses and tries to grind it out,
Then it metastasizes into a multi-year global depression. $200 oil combined with a 35% reduction in urea guarantees hyperinflation and a severe global famine.
state collapses, migratory crises. It's bleak.
Very bleak.
Well, we spent an hour dissecting the tactical reality, the yuan filter, the information war. But I want to leave the listener with a final chilling thought that wasn't fully explored in the main reports, but it's right there under the surface. We talked about the death of the petrodollar. We talked about strikes on AWS data centers and massive cyber attacks.
Right.
What if the ultimate casualty of this war isn't just a regime or a currency? What if the ultimate casualty is the global internet itself?
A total digital balkanization.
Exactly. If the world splits into two irreconcilable economic blocks, one using the dollar, one using the yuan, how long until the digital world physically splinters? How long until we are left with a Western internet and an Eastern internet completely walled off from one another?
It would permanently roll back decades of globalization in a matter of months.
It's a profound thought to consider the next time you log on and assume the rest of the world is staring at the same screen. Thank you for joining us today. Keep questioning the narratives, stay vigilant, and we will see you on the next deep dive.